listen. It's been a long time. Now everybody gon' play my funk. See your mama, come on, move that jump. Yup, Southside gon' pop trunk. Coming down with my swag in the pump. Old school gon' feel this track. Yup.
Hi, welcome back again to the Sofa Nostra podcast. Got a special guest with me today. I have my sister, Jerice Johnson, and we're going to today talk about creating wills. We know that in our community, a lot of times we own property, we own houses and other assets, and we don't really take the time to go through our assets and see basically what do we have and what's going to happen to those assets once we pass on or something become hospitalized and we're not able to make decisions based on the assets that we do have. So today we're just going to give just a ground level introduction on some of the things that you can do to help you get control and manage your assets while you're living, as well as when you pass on to your estate. And we're going to start by talking about creating a will first, and then we'll go through a couple of steps on that, and then we'll go through some subsequent steps, and then we'll provide any links in the description later on to certain websites that may be useful to you. So having said that, let's talk about the history of wills and why they're important and why we would need them.
Sure.
So,
There's a misconception that once a person dies, that whatever they have is going to go to X, whomever. And so what a will does is when it comes to real property, a will designates and divides that property up. People typically have insurance policies that you have beneficiaries, you name beneficiaries. And while that is the case, you pass away, your beneficiary is the person that is going to receive those funds and things like that. When it comes to real property, it has to be written and divided up. So it's different than you having a beneficiary on an insurance policy.
right. Yeah, and it's depending on the number, just at a high level, depending on the number of kids you may have, it gets complicated on the percentages. You know, if you have a house, that house is not just percentage-wise, it's broken up. And it can even get more complicated, right? We're going to see later if you got kids from another previous relationship. So,
Absolutely.
so let's talk about first things first. Creating a will. There's some websites out there that can help us out. So do you have a couple of things that you would like to share for our audience about what the key points when we're creating wills and
Absolutely. So when we're creating a will, you want to make sure that you're very specific. So you're writing out specifically how you want to divide your real property. So for example, of Jermaine and myself, Jermaine has 2 homes. He has a son. One of the homes is a home we grew up in. So if Jermaine was to pass away today, both of those homes automatically go to his son because he's not no spouse. He only has the one son. And so he would need to have a will designated to say that the house we grew up in goes to my sister and the house that I live in now goes to my son. So that has to be written, because if it's not written, then it will automatically go to my nephew. And so that's why wills are important, where you're specifically stating who gets what. And we can't assume that just because I'm his sibling that, hey, I'm going to get the house that we grew up in because, hey, I grew up there. That's not the case. And so it has to be written in a will. And then for myself, as an example, I have one son, one home. So mine's a little bit easier than Jermaine's, because if I pass away, it'll automatically go to my son. But, Lord forbid, but if something happens to my son, then I do need to have it written out that where I want it to go to Jermaine. Well, if Jermaine's passed away, I need to say, I want it to go to my uncle or cousin. So that's why the will is so important, because you're specifying who do you want your property to go to, as well as, and you can also put those beneficiaries in there for your insurance policies and things like that. Even though that's already written, the will just basically details out where your real property is going and who it's going to.
right? And there's you touched on a lot of great things there. There's a lot of nuances in that. What she basically was saying was true. It's what you're going to do with your current assets and how they're going to get them. They could get it all at one time. If they're younger kids and something happens to you, you can put it in like put it away, and it can get a little bit over time. If it's money, things of that nature, or when they turn 18, they go sign a couple papers, and then that process starts when they get 18. So there's a lot of little nuances between the kids' ages and the parents, and how that goes. So one thing that I was hearing about creating a will is there's some websites out there that are helpful. Can you
Absolutely.
provide
There
a
are
couple of
definitely
those?
some free online websites, online resources. You can go to lawdepot.com, trustandwill.com, and of course, legalzoom.com. And those give you good information. They have templates. Some templates you have to pay for. Some templates are free, depending on the information that you're putting inside of the template. And so those are definitely a starting point for you to sit down and say, okay, how do I want to divide this real property up?
Right. And let me just add this little caveat. This is Jermaine and Jerice on the Sofa Nostra podcast. You're not a wills and estate attorney, are you?
No.
I'm not a wills and estate attorney. So this is just informational only. So we're not licensed professionals. So keep that in mind also. So now, Ms. Johnson, we've created, we're going through these websites. We're creating our will. We're taking a look at all of our assets. I got homes. I got this. I got a little jewelry. I may have some money in the account over here. There's some things that they need to know about when you have money in accounts and stuff like that. I don't know if we're going to talk about that now, but you've created your will now. You've gone online. What are some of the little key points or other little bullets that you need to know while you're creating it and after also that when you've created your will?
So before I answer that question, you talked
Sure.
about the money. Back in the day, if you will, banks, you used to have to go inside of the bank to name someone your beneficiary. So for example, banks, if the person is not on the bank account, the person does not receive the money. Like until you probate the will or you go to court. So if someone
Which could
dies,
go 9 months to 2 years,
Yes.
depending on your state. That's how long it takes to probate most wills.
Right.
Sorry.
And so if you pass away, if that person is not on your account, now the banks, you can do a beneficiary. So for example, Bank of America, they have it online. So if you go straight online, you can name your beneficiary. So if something was to happen, that person can go in there, show a death certificate, and now they can receive those funds out of that account. Whereas before in the past, you couldn't take a death certificate. You had to have it probated before the banks give you the money. And so now that's very important on your banks to put someone down as a beneficiary, because if not, that money is sitting there, and then it'll eventually probably go to the state until they work it out with probate court. So that's the beneficiary with the money part of it.
Okay.
Putting people down on your bank accounts as your beneficiary in case of death. So payable upon death is what they sometimes call it as well.
Right. I've heard that.
So that's with the money. Now, when we talk about the estate part of it, what happens is when you die without a will in Texas, it's called an intestate. And so your children will receive intestate share on your property. Now, the size of each child's portion depends on how many children you have. And so what we can talk about is who gets what in Texas. So we can go into who gets what in Texas and give you a couple of scenarios, and then the other scenarios will be in the comment section or on a graphic.
So, Ms. Johnson, there's I've read out there that there's information that how many executors should you have on your estate? Most people think that you can have multiple executors, but I've read that you should really probably only have like one.
Yep. So one executor, the person that's your executor can also be, which I know we're probably going to get into jumping ahead, will be your power of attorney.
We'll circle back.
So that person can be your executor as well as your power of attorney. So the difference between the two is the power of attorney is the person that is while you're living. That person can have say, control, if you will, if you become incapacitated or something like that, then that person is your power of attorney to make decisions for you. Whereas your executor is once you have passed on. So then that person is executing now what you put in writing, your wishes, your plans, and all of those things.
Right, and you don't want more than one of those, right? Because you can obviously see where there may conflict. One person may say one thing, and then you have a whole nother dispute on your hands, right? So we talked about the power of attorney. There's also another, in Texas, there's also another power of attorney.
Yes, the medical power of attorney. So while your power of attorney deals with your financial obligations, if you will, or financial things, this medical power of attorney is the person that speaks on your behalf for medically. So if you're in the hospital and they want, DNR, you do not resuscitate, or those types of things, that person is the person that speaks on your behalf medically for you. Surgeries and things like that. If you're 80-something years old and they're like, oh, we want to do surgery, that you can have a power of attorney to say, no, we're not going to do that on my mother or father or sister or brother for that matter. And then they can make those decisions. Because typically hospitals, just almost like banks, they're only talking to the next person, which is the spouse, due to HIPAA laws and things like that. So it's very good that if you do have a power of attorney, the person that you name, because they're not talking to girlfriends, they're not talking to boyfriends or anything like that based off of HIPAA and things like that. So it's important to designate someone because we don't know when we will become incapacitated. So to have it ahead of time is saying, hey, this is the person that I designated to speak on my behalf medically.
Okay, very good to know. So now we're talking about medical P of A's. We've got your executor or your power of attorney while you're living. So you've gone through your paperwork. You've filled out your paperwork. You've appointed these folks or thought about who you want in these positions, and now you're ready to get to signing. What is another important thing that you should probably have?
So for your will, you filled out everything, you've appointed these people, you divided up your land, your property, and all of those things. You have to have witnesses. And so 2 witnesses need to sign your will as well. And the key thing about the 2 witnesses is they can't be your spouse and they cannot be your beneficiary.
Right.
And so I think that's a very good point.
It have to be 18 or over.
And they have to be 18 or over, yes. And so I think that's a very good point when you're drawing this will up, because you're not choosing your spouse and you're choosing, someone, a trusted friend, a family member that you entrust your life with, essentially, to make sure that it is, your will is being executed. And I would like to say that a will could possibly become a fluid document. And when I say fluid, it's important that you have to update it, because you may put someone in your will that may have passed on. And so now that person's no longer living. And so you want to just make sure that it's up to date with the names and the people that are in it. Try to update. I don't want to say fluid, because once you sign it and everything
Dynamic.
like that, but
Yeah.
you need to go back and reference it probably every 10 years or so, or as people pass away, to make sure that it has up-to-date information and up-to-date persons.
Those like on your medical insurance, those life-changing events, kind of almost, right? Yeah, you mentioned that's good. And these witnesses are actually going to be watching you sign the document, and they're going to sign as well. So you got 2 additional witnesses once you sign all of your documents. The next thing we wanted to talk about, do we want to get into who gets what and go over those, and then we could go into
scenarios.
Yeah. So who gets what in Texas under interstate succession, which my sister mentioned earlier? Who gets what depends on whether you have living children, parents, or close relatives when you die. So we're going to provide a chart in the graphics down below in the link or in the actual video. But we're just going to give you like the first couple of ones that kind of encompasses a lot of people. So
Right. So the first one, children but no spouse. So that'll be me and Jermaine. So our children will
if you die
inherit
with
everything.
children,
If you die with children and no spouse, then that means that those children will inherit everything. If you die with a spouse but no children, no parents, or no siblings, then that spouse inherits everything. And so that's pretty much someone who has no children, their parents are both deceased, and then they have no spouses, or they could be only children. The next one is you die with parents, but you don't have children or spouse or siblings, then your parents would inherit everything from you. And then the last one that we're going to talk about, but there are plenty more, is if you die with siblings, but you don't have children, spouse, or parents, then your siblings will inherit everything.
Okay, that's definitely good to know. And like we mentioned, there are some other scenarios, and we'll provide those to you a little bit later. So, based on what you just said, when our dad died, the house came to me, right? But it used to be, if you didn't have a will, it was kind of a little dicey situation. You'd have to go and probate it and in the courts, and I remember when Mom passed, we waited 2 or 3 years to get her benefits because they had to investigate, did she have any more kids in the world? So they have to do this, they have to do a bunch of things in order to make sure, okay, now we're settling on these 2 kids. She only has 2 kids. She doesn't have any more kids. So they had to do all this investigating. So what I just wanted to say is, like, if you do have a home, and is there an easier way that we can go out there and not have to go through the court system to get assets?
Yes.
especially particular homes, and that's a big thing in our community because a lot of the wealth doesn't pass on to the generation. That's why we're doing this.
Absolutely. There is, and in the state of Texas, it allows you to essentially execute a transfer on death for real property. And it's called the Lady Bird deed. It got its name from President Lyndon B. Johnson. He used it to convey the property to his wife, Lady Bird Johnson. And so the Lady Bird deed is a special kind of deed that is commonly recognized by Texas law. So in the state of Texas, it's the Lady Bird deed. And basically, it's called an enhanced life estate deed, and it can be used to transfer property to beneficiaries outside of probate. So in that case, the probate court is kind of taken out of the picture. You can definitely research it, the Lady Bird deed. However, I would highly recommend you still also do that will to ensure that you have that stuff written out for you.
And there's that smooth transition. We actually covered a lot in this section, and we're actually kind of maybe coming up on the end. If do you have anything that you would like to add? Because I did have one other bullet that wasn't discussed earlier, and it revolves around family communication. And in the research that I've done, I found that that's really important. That's a lot of things that we don't do in our community. Is once you have all of this set up that we've talked about, you need to have a sit down with your family and discuss what's out there. I know a lot of people thinking, well, you're not gonna knock me off of my head if I tell you how much money you're getting and all that kind of stuff. But in all seriousness, you do need to have that discussion. Even if you don't go into numbers and specifics, this person has this person is the guardian for this, and this person, I think that needs to be, especially if you have younger kids, or just if you don't have younger kids, just everybody kind of needs to know what the family, because it is the family communication plan. So guardians for the children, will there be a trustee? Will it be a trustee appointed to handle these affairs after you're gone? And as my sister mentioned earlier, I forgot the term you used, but new assets. It's called an asset update. And so that's what she was saying. As things go on in your life, you gather new assets. Life changes. You're not with this person anymore. This person is no longer, the person you want to be. Yeah, as the guardian anymore. Things change. So you definitely need to have your assets updated over a period of time.
Right.
Those life changes.
The only thing I would like to say is obviously preparation, just preparing so your family members won't have to try to figure things out. So one of the things that I've done is I've created a folder, and inside the folder it has basically all the information. It has credit card numbers, pictures of my credit cards, I should say. It has passwords to different accounts and things like that. So my son knows that in the event in the event that I pass away, he knows that, hey, this is where he can go. He can give it to my brother. And so just bought an accordion style folder, and inside of it has all of that information. And at some point I plan to put, obviously the copy of the will, for me, I'm probably gonna write my own obituary, but you can put all of those things inside of it, how you want to be put away, and that way that your family members won't have to go like, whoa, did she have this life insurance? All my life insurance policy information is in there, beneficiaries are in there, all of those things are in their house information, because they need to know, okay, we have to contact the mortgage company, or we have to contact the car dealership for your cars and things like that. So just creating a file to where your family can get to it in the event of your death, so then they don't have to go searching around looking for account numbers or life insurance policies and things like that. The only other thing I would like to talk about is life insurance. Is a lot of times people leave jobs and their life insurance policy stays with the job. So just making sure you're communicating, hey, if I leave this job, does my life insurance go with me, or do I have to seek out some new life insurance? And life insurance now is so affordable in the sense of you can just do straight plots, and you can just do plot side service. You don't have to do like a whole with the church and all of those things. So just looking into those things, however you want, if you want to be cremated and those types of things. So just looking into that and making sure you've written it out for your loved ones to be able to put you away. One of the personal stories I just remember growing up is my mom died first, and they were like, oh, my grandparents told him to get him a plot next to hers. And he's like, oh, no, he wasn't going to do that, because no. And so now they're buried on two different sides of the cemetery, all because he didn't get his plot, which he should have gotten at the time, next to her. And so just if you and your spouse want to be buried next to each other, that's important to get your plots next to each other. Not waiting until one dies to get the other plot, and so on and so forth. So just keeping that in mind, just being prepared.
But in our community, a lot of people don't like talking about this, because you're talking about death and talking about something that's gonna happen, but we don't like having these conversations. And how do we just gotta be able to do it? How do we?
I think I think the younger generations is basically forcing has to force the older generation's hands to say, hey, we got to sit down. Like, we have to talk about this.
This is wealth.
Where is it? You know, or at least just tell me where it is so I can find it when you do pass away. You know, you don't have to maybe give it all to me up front right now. But just point me in the direction so when you pass away, I'm not trying to go do a GoFundMe for you.
That's a whole nother podcast. But the last thing, before we get out of here, you were saying about, and Miss Johnson, I noticed that this is paper and it's plastic. What if a fire or a flood? What should I do? Should probably maybe invest in like a little small safe or something fireproof and put your documents in. So, but definitely probably get you one of these to keep everything in one place. And the last thing is something that you and I had been talking about, but we didn't mention it here yet. And I just thought about it before we were planning, is that, you know, in this tech age, you've got all these passwords. So now we're talking about is planning for the rest of your life. I mean, after you pass away. But I've got 10 passwords. What should I do?
Yes, well, it's a couple of them. So you can, you know, they have password keepers now. I mean, technology has gotten so advanced that some people keep their password keepers on their cell phones. Some people keep them on thumb drives and things like that. I'm a paper and pen girl, but I do know that if a fire happens, and where is it? So you probably have an electronic copy, so, you know, a soft copy as well as a hard copy. It would be important because for me, I would definitely want my family members to be able to get into, you know, bank accounts or things like that in the event of my death. That's right. I wouldn't want a robber to get into them. Yeah. So you just have to kind of keep them secure.
Right, and that was what she was saying. She's paper and pen, but you got to keep that secure, right? Sure. So obviously. So yeah, so if you're paper and pen, just make sure you're locking it up, putting it in somewhere in a secure location. You can even if you don't want to trust anybody to have it, it could be a part of your will saying, in the event I pass away, this information is housed here. So, you know, but so hopefully a lot of this was helpful. We'll be thinking of some other things to try to bring you some information in the future. But if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and then we'll take that, and we maybe even a future episode, and we can address some of those questions that you may have. But this is an effort to everybody, you know, especially Black and brown folks, to get our paperwork in order when we pass along, because if you don't, you run a risk of losing everything that you worked so hard for, and blessing that generational wealth down and cascading that down to other generations is what we need to be really looking forward to. So anything in closing?
Nope, that's it.
You done a good job.
Prepare. Take care of your business and prepare.
You heard it right there. La Sofa Nostra podcast. Thanks for joining us. Catch you next time. Bye.
Hello, Houston. It's been a long time. Now everybody gonna play my funk. See your mama, come on, move that junk. Yup, Southside going pop trunk. Coming down with my swag in the pump. Old school gun feel this track. Yup.